Welcome to episode 79 of Regional Wrap, pre-recorded on Monday the 13th of March. Regional Wrap, providing an insight to issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, our regions, just the state's backyard or potential powerhouses, is my guest, Nick Cater. Nick is the Executive Director of the Menzies Research Centre and is a regular columnist for the Australian newspaper and is a Sky News presenter. Born in the UK, he graduated from the University of Exeter in 1980 and a year later joined the BBC as a trainee studio manager. Nick worked as a producer in the London bureau of Channel 7's from 1983 to 1986 before rejoining the BBC as a journalist. He produced and directed the documentary Bridge Builders, comparing the construction of the Tyne Bridge in Newcastle and the Sydney Harbour Bridge. In 1989, Nick moved his young family to Australia and started with News Limited's Adelaide Advertiser and became the Group Asia correspondent in 1993. He worked in senior and editorial roles at the Daily Telegraph and Sunday Telegraph in Sydney before joining the Australian in 2004. He was appointed weekend editor of the Australian in 2007. Nick was appointed Executive Director of Menzies Research Centre in July 2014. Under him, the Menzies Research Centre has increased its presence in the media, in key policy debates, published a wide range of books about liberalism and the Liberal Party. And Nick is driven by intellectual curiosity, love of robust debate and adherence to the core Liberal principles. Welcome, Nick.
Thanks for having me on, Bill. Really pleased to be here.
Well, if you can give us a bit of your background as a youngster, maybe, and what sort of mischief people got up into London in the 70s and 80s, I'm sure it wasn't much different from the people in Australia in the capital cities at that time either.
No, well, I very much doubt if it was. I actually I grew up, well, sort of in the country, as much as in the country as you can get in the UK, because there's nowhere you're far from a major town. But I grew up just on the edge of the New Forest, beautiful part of the world, and had a great childhood, but always loved Australia. It's funny, I mean, I had a great aunt in Australia, and she used to send me little gifts and things. And so from an early age, I was fascinated with this country. So I seized the first opportunity I had to come here and just loved it, never looked back. So I'm a proud Australian now. I've been a citizen since 1991, Australia Day, 1991. So Australia Day for me is very special, like a really special day. And I won't have them messing with it because it means a lot to me and a lot of people who've been fortunate to become Australian citizens. So, this country means so much to me now. And I'm proud to be an Australian. Great to have the opportunities you have here. Great for my children, now my grandchildren, to be here. And I just want to make sure that we stick by those principles that drove me here, the freedom, but also the fact that citizenship, everybody's got equal respect for everybody else. That was the Australia that I came to, and I just hope that's not slipping.
Well, we hope not to, but it seems to be under continual attack, and unfortunately, it's by Australians themselves. It's an internal issue, especially from academia, and the people who, to me, it's the people who've hit that peak of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They've got to self-actualization, where most of us are struggling with the day-to-day issues of shelter, paying their mortgage, making sure there's food on the table and that. But we do seem to have this class of people who are well off, comfortable, sitting up in that peak of self-actualization, trying to justify their existence, and at the same time also trying to enforce what their beliefs are on the rest of us.
Yeah, Oh, that's so true, Bill. And I think you're right about that hierarchy of needs. These are luxury beliefs, I call them. You can hold these beliefs if you've got enough money and haven't got any cares in the world. I mean, the passion for climate change, reducing emissions, for instance. I was in Double Bay the other day. That double. You've heard the phrase "double bay, double pay." It's I had a coffee there with a friend. It cost us $7 each. I didn't see anybody round about really blinking at that price because inflation doesn't mean much to them there. And certainly, energy bills, they're not too worried about energy bills. They're well-off people. They don't have to travel very far. They don't have long commutes or anything like that. They don't drive, utes to work. So it's a very different environment. And then it's in those places, isn't it, that people are most passionate about changing the climate, as if it was possible. And it's there that they want, they're most passionate about renewable energy. And I just feel, deeply uncomfortable about that, having been out and seen what, so-called green, clean energy looks like close up, in some of these rural districts where, whether it's a wind farm or a solar panel or the transmission lines, this is major industrial revolution going on in Australia. And the people in the city are, one, blind to it, and two, just really don't care. In fact, they like it. They like it because it gets them closer to their utopia of a clean future.
Well, the thing is, being from the regions and that, we're the people who are bearing the brunt of it. Just want them. I just want the wind turbines all dotted along Sydney Harbour, one just under the bridge, one over the Opera House, all along Bondi Beach, and anywhere else we can put rip up all the parkland, put solar panels on it, and they can join the revolution, and rather than sticking it on us out here in the regions.
I'd rather go for a small modular nuclear reactor, to be honest, if we can have a choice, Bill. One is they're much more compact. Like you can build a small modular reactor on about 18 hectares of land that'll put out as much power as a wind farm that's over about 10 square kilometers. I mean, it's ridiculous how land hungry those renewable energies are compared to the nuclear. And what's more, the nuclear power station, the small modular reactor, will put out power 24 hours a day, not just when it feels like it.
Yeah, and the thing is, we don't even need that. We've got our coal-fired stations. We just need to build new ones on the sites that they're already on, or whatever. A few new ones. It gives us cheap, reliable power. It had up until 2007, until Rudd signed up to Kyoto, and then that's when the inflation rate, or CPI, kept going up like that, but the electricity rate went up like that. Separated from widely, and you can see, if you actually look at the graph for the comparison to CPI prices and electricity, you can see where it's shot off from Rudd, then continued up, and then when we got to Abbott in 2000, I think he won in about 2013, I think. Then it went a bit flat, plateaued. Yeah. Then we came back to Turnbull, and then it shot off again away from the CPI, and it's been that way ever since. So I think what we're doing now is not only undermining our energy security, but we're also undermining our national security, because now with wind farms and solar, you're depending on foreign goods from overseas. You also, worst thing is, not only do we have to purchase them, and a lot of it's manufactured in China, but also a lot of the ownership is from overseas people. So what you're paying on your electricity bills is you're just sending overseas the profits in other countries. But before we get on to that too far, I want to know about your little job with the BBC, and why you did a documentary on the Tyne Bridge in Newcastle, comparing it to the Sydney Harbour Bridge. I've got to share here. This is the two bridges. You're one in Newcastle, Sydney Harbour Bridge. Sydney Harbour Bridge is a longer span, but not as a long run up over it. But there's a natural difference in the girder system in regards to the Tyne Rivers is a much higher arch, and it's thicker in the middle compared to where in the Sydney Harbour it was thinner in the middle and thicker at the base, as far as the girder spacing goes. So what initiated this documentary? Was it just they similar? That's just an opportunity to get to Australia, Nick?
Yeah, well, it was partly that, but no. The story. Well, what happened was I was working in Newcastle upon Tyne, where that bridge is in the northeast of the country for the BBC, and because the locals would always tell you they were very proud of their bridge, and they'd say this was the model for the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and I thought, is that actually true? And then I looked into it, and I discovered that it wasn't the model, but it was built by the same company, Dorman Long. Dorman Long was a steel producing company up there in Middlesbrough in the northeast of England, and they produced the steel. And they built the Tyne Bridge was finished in 1928, I think, if I remember.
Yep.
And the Sydney Harbour Bridge was just beginning to be constructed around then. So, and that was finished in 32. It is it's a third of the length, but you're right about the girder structure, but the key point that is similar with it is that they're both called dual pinned steel arch bridges. So they've got two pins that they rest on. You can probably see down there at the base. That's it. One there, one the other side. And if you go to Sydney Harbour Bridge, you can see it because they're like huge bolts. The whole weight of the bridge rests on those. That's the way it's constructed. And so it's that similar design and technique, and so similar challenges for both. And the interesting thing is those towers at the end, which the Sydney Harbour Bridge looks so impressive. From above the roadway are purely for decoration. They wouldn't have to put those in; the thing would hold up. But they're just there to give it some dimension. But they're both very elegant bridges. And then what clinched it was I came across at the British Steel would taken over Dorman Long by then. We're talking about the 80s, and they discovered this really good archive footage about an hour in length, all up, of black and white footage of the construction of both bridges. So based with that, I thought, well, I'll go away and I'll make a documentary. And I found people who'd worked on the bridge who were just still alive on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Oh no, on the Tyne Bridge. Sorry, not the other one. I just found the whole thing fascinating. I guess I'm a bit of a frustrated engineer. But,
I thought it might have been triggered by the fact that the people in Newcastle thought theirs was the original, and Bradfield stole it. But the actual fact is Bradfield put the plans into the government in 1912. It was under consideration, but then when World War I broke out, it was shelved and didn't come back to life till 1922. So the design of the Sydney Harbour Bridge was 1912. So I think it predates the
Bradfield's role is interesting. I mean, he was very instrumental in the design, but the final design was done by a guy called Lawrence Ennis, who was a British engineer. He did the technical design. The concept was there from Bradfield, and actually, when you go up to Milson's Point Station, which is just by the bridge here in Sydney, there's an Ennis Road named after Lawrence Ennis. So I always see that and think. I interviewed his son actually, but so Bradfield was a remarkable man. We could go on about him for a long time, but he was the sort of guy we need today, isn't he? Somebody with vision and courage and could see what the country could look like if we just did the right investment. Because he also built the Story Bridge, of course, in Brisbane, and had those fantastic schemes for inland irrigation.
Well, it'd be good if we could see a few of those faces in our political people. I read back and you look at the people like Sir John Forrest, who in like a fledgling colony only becomes self-government in about 1890. In 1894, it borrowed $2.5 million pound, which is equivalent to 40 billion today, Australian dollars. Took that loan out with only a population of 50 odd thousand people, and built 2 dams and the irrigations and the pumping system to get water up to Kalgoorlie. Now, you tell me any politician around these days who have got that sort of vision. I think the last person who had a bit of vision was probably Charles Port in West Australia, who put the backing into the Ord River Dam. That it just hasn't realised its potential, but there's a lot of water up there that could be pumped down to Perth if they really, really wanted to. So, we need a few people with a bit of vision and that. So I don't know how we're going to get them. It's up to the Menzies Centre to inspire some of these people in the Liberal Party to maybe go back and visit Mr. Menzies' philosophies and start acting on them.
But I think it's also about remembering our history, Bill. I mean, we don't do these days. People don't. I don't think any of this gets taught in schools. Do you think for 1 second there's anybody coming out of school in WA who's got a clue who John Forrest was? Or you know, we just don't teach the history of our land, and so you know, there's no kind of understanding about how you develop a country as vast as this with such great resources, but they're not easy to get. You have to plan, you have to work hard, you have to invest if you're going to get the great wealth that's available for toil in this country, as our anthem says, wealth for toil. And I just fear that this isn't being taught, or when it is, it's being taught as something negative. You know, like the pioneering spirit that built this country is considered now to be, you know, somehow dangerous because it, you know, eats up the resources or heats the planet or something. You know, so we've forgotten to teach our kids about the importance of progress, because progress is what makes everybody's life better, and in the end, you know, generates wealth and prosperity for all of us.
Well, I think we underestimate the value of our pioneers, and the fact in a mere 113 years, the pioneers, under arduous conditions. I mean, you're an Englishman, you come over here, I bet you found it was conditions a bit hot and that at times, and the flies and all that. So you imagine the pioneers that came out here, and if you go to some of the historical societies in the small towns, like in Melbourne, you only have to go up to places in the Dandenongs like Sylvan and things like that, and you can see their historical museums, and you've got photos, and the same up here in Mareeba and Miller. There's little you go and see what they're doing. You know, you see some guys there with axes and bow saws cutting down trees that, you know, about 10 foot across at the base and clearing the land. I mean, I don't think too many of us would be that tough to do those sort of things these days. Thank heavens for machinery.
That's right. It's very important what those local historical societies do. You know, many of them volunteers, of course. They haven't got a lot in the way of money, but they're proud of their towns and their districts. They're proud of their history, and they want to preserve it. And I think that's so important. You know, we went through over the summer, we did a big drive over to Perth and went through Albany. I was so impressed with the way Albany people enjoyed and appreciated their history. You know, there's just down on the waterfront, there's a sort of big open air museum, just about the first ships
even that
came
evil whaling station.
That's right. I mean, they're not. You know, they just tell their history like it was, and let other people make up their minds. And then, of course, right up there on the hill, now they've got that magnificent museum for the Anzacs. It is outstanding. If anybody hasn't been there, put it on your bucket list.
Yeah, because that's where they their last place to stop before they went to the Middle East, World War One. So it has a lot of history, and actually Albany has a lot of history. In fact, that was the first pass. They sent a military detachment there in about 1826,
that's right,
3 years before
Quite
West
early.
Australia was found, as a military thing against the French, to stop the French considering, you know, put the flag in their flag.
Yeah. No, it is a fascinating country, and the history just comes alive in those little museums and towns. So good on. I salute the people that run those. They're fantastic.
Well, then you salute those people, but then you have to give a few barbs to the politicians who don't fund, of all the grants. Like if someone wants a grant and you go to do something about climate change, then some conservation, they'll give you $600,000 to Mackay's conservation mob, but they wouldn't give $1 to, say, the Mariba Historical Society sort of thing. It's quite out of proportion, and I think the politicians, like in the Liberal Party, if they get up there and they say, well, this has got to be one of our policies, we've got to help fund these, or not to go to bankroll them completely. We still want to encourage people to participate, fundraise and that, but we'll take the onerous part out of it in regards to make sure you've got enough funds there to cover your insurance, your association requirements, all those sort of things, and a few other dollars for maintenance and management. And I think that's all those sort of people need to sort of get, they say, well, we've got this coming in. Well, then let's have more fundraising. You get more items, get more displays, and open more hours and things like that. It's those little things that would make a big difference to those little towns, and also it helps tourism and those sort of things. It doesn't take much of that sort of. It only costs a few dollars instead of spending big money on something else.
Well, yeah, and it's so important because we can't trust our universities to look after our history. I mean, university history departments these days have gone, totally weird, like every other university department, and they're more about denying our history or telling us how evil it is, rather than actually just telling it like it is. So tell you what, history doesn't belong to the academics. It belongs to all of us. So we can all play a part in preserving it.
Well, the thing is, I think people would get a great kick to take their children and have a look at some of these small historical site. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, the one up in Sylvan and that, it had all the people's dresses. It had the ring of washing machines. It had, the thing, the daily life of a wife in the household was from dawn to dusk, just getting food on the table, keeping things clean and that. And it was as arduous, I would say, as far as physical effort, to what the guys were doing out in the field at times.
Oh, I think you're right, Bill. Life, and you should take our kids along and say, this is what life was like before electricity. Electricity just changed domestic life overnight. Suddenly you could get appliances to do what would take your days. I mean, the ironing, for instance, plug in an iron and you've done it in 20 minutes. I know you have. I know you iron all your own shirts, Bill. Same as me.
Yeah,
but,
you can tell.
I mean, it would take a typical farm, a woman on a farm a whole day to do it. She'd have to heat up the iron, get the fire going. She'd have to get the clothes and starch them, and so I think we just need to remind ourselves that electricity has made us flourish. We've given us flourishing lives and better lives. And where did that electricity come from? Well, oil, coal principally, but also oil and gas have been important to us. So fossil fuels, which is what? It's stored energy, isn't it? It's the sun's energy in a beautifully stored in a form that you can transport just about anywhere.
Well, I think coal was first, somewhere in Scotland, I think, not far from Newcastle, was dug up. And in about 1575, I think, the first commercial operation. Well, the operations with coal basically saved European forests from complete destruction, because at that time you were in what they call the Little Ice Age. So the forests were getting pretty well, they were always harvested for shipbuilding and other thing and wood gathering, but I suppose there was a lot more pilfering in the Royal Forest in those coal periods. But basically, coal came along and it really saved all the European forests from that sort of limited destruction. But in the couple of 100 years it's been around in regards to Industrial revolution and the electricity generation on grid scale didn't come in until the late 1990s in places like the United States and that. And the grids, the national sort of or big grid, was only a thing of the 20th century. But that development really has reduced manual labour to right down, mechanisation, appliances that make our life easier. And basically, it's given us 40 years of additional life. The advent of the grid and electricity being available to everyone, so factories can produce things, scientists can develop things, drug companies can make things, and then all that added to our life expectancy. So at the turn of the 20th century, life expectancy for a European male was only about 45. Now it's up around 85. So that extra 40 years can be attributed to fossil fuels and electricity and what's come from that.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of social credit to me.
It is, and also we can support a lot more people than we used to be able to. If you think about the role of ammonia and industrial fertilizers, industrial pesticides, the sort of things that that enabled us really to double the productive capacity of our farmland and then keep improving it. So, if say the greenies had their way and we suddenly couldn't produce industrial fertilizer anymore, all right, fair enough. But, anybody on a farm will tell you probably get about half the yield. And that means you can feed half as the number of people. So would the greenies like to tell us which half of the world's population they would like to starve? Because that's what the result would be if we just suddenly dropped fossil fuels tomorrow.
Well, the experiment, the short-term experiment in Sri Lanka in 2020,
perfect example.
If that wasn't a wake-up call for the world, but you've got European countries still demanding that to reduce the amount of fertilizer, and it's becoming a major fight between the agricultural sector and farmers and the state in regards to, well, we want to produce food and we want to have volume and we need the fertilizer, and you've got governments that turn around and tell them you've got to halve your fertilizer use in a few years.
Yeah. No, I think it's just really important that we just fight this, increasing sort of pressure on farming from the green movement, and just say, well, you just don't know what you're talking about. I mean, the farming, when it's properly done, as can add carbon to the soil. So it's taking carbon out of the atmosphere. It's doing what they want us to do, but it's doing it in a natural way, and it's doing it in a way that allows us the farms to flourish. It helps with water runoff. It helps with biodiversity. The forms of agriculture where you actually regenerative agriculture, they call it, and they're practicing that widely now, is good for the planet. So don't tell us that we need to stop farming. That's just ridiculous.
Well, the thing is now, and it's been around for a while, but we don't have that tilling of the soil and turning it over to, so it's just a brown clod and we have dust in it. We now have sophisticated sowing machines that drill the seed into the ground, so you don't actually have to actually dig it up and disturb the topsoil, and that way there's more and more root system added into the soil, and that's basically the carbon part of it going into the soil, the root size and that.
Well, that's right. That's what plants have been doing for approximately 500 million years. They are machines for taking carbon out of the atmosphere and putting it into soil. That's what they do. And and you're right. No-till farming has just been revolutionary, and you know how quickly it took on because farmers realised it was good for productivity as well. And now it's happening with grazing too. With rotational grazing techniques down here they use on the beef farms and the sheep farms and the dairy farms, and I gather there's all sorts of techniques they're using now up in Queensland, too, which stop runoff, which is very important. You know, you're not getting as much runoff because the soil becomes organically richer and more spongy, if you like, and can absorb more water, more like the natural soil used to be. So it is, you know, I think these are very important things. We just don't trumpet them enough and say that actually farmers are actually good for the environment. You know, they're not. When you stop farming, it's when you start to get problems. It's when you start to get weed growth and everything else. Feral animals. Yeah.
But one of the interesting things is that also the marketplace and costs creates innovation. Like, I know with the farmers now, people think, well, they use too much fertilizer. Well, it costs money. Farmers don't want to waste money. They don't want to use too much fertilizer and that. And it's interesting now, there's now a thing called nanotechnology, and there's ways to deliver much smaller amounts of fertilizer in a very selective means that also it doesn't run too far from where it's put into the soil. So you don't have a lot of runoff and you're only putting in minimal. So these are sort of things that are being innovated, and it's quite interesting that the market and market forces are driving these things at a much better rate than what the government will ever do.
That's right. It's always been thus, and Australia once again is on the cutting edge of farming technology with some of these techniques with the GPS farming and so forth, just as it was in the 19th century with, you know, the famous stump jump plough, that great Australian invention, and mechanical shearing. You know, that mechanical shearing was first invented in Australia by a guy called Woolsey, and it was 20 years before the Americans caught up with that technology.
And one of the other things with all this innovation, what the green activities is actually regress. It's pushing do less, and to do nothing. You know, go back to the cave sort of mentality. They want us to stop this, stop that, and I think people are sort of need to wake up to that. They are a regressive sort of group compared to farmers and people in business.
Yeah, they are, and also, you know, people have got to realize that their solutions are not solutions. They're actually creating more problems, and you know, that they just simply do not have the answer to agriculture. They don't even pretend to. They don't even have the answer to transport, really. I mean, they say electrify everything. Okay, well, that's all right if you're in the city, but obviously, you know, nobody. I wouldn't think too many of your viewers and listeners are driving Teslas right now. And you know, I was talking to a mate of mine, Jock, who runs a farm out at Rankin Springs out in the far west of New South Wales, and he was just complaining because he'd had to put 1,000 litres of diesel in his header. And I thought, well, how are they? Is there any sign of an electric header on the market? You know, or any of these large, you know, farm machinery, farm equipment, or trucks? You know, the trucks you see heading up and down the Hume Highway or whatever. They're never going to. I can't ever see electrification becoming an option. Certainly not with the current technology. So we've just got to realise that's a fact, and stop sweating about it.
The other thing that the Greens would jump up about the diesel going in the header, they'd say, "Oh, he's getting a subsidy. He's being subsidised by the taxpayer." I mean, this is one of their big slogans that they keep chucking out. Fossil fuel is subsidised. I think this is something that needs to be knocked on the head by industry. And that, to my knowledge, there is no. If you go through the budget, you won't find any payments from the government direct to a farmer or direct to anyone producing fossil fuels coming from the taxpayer. What there is, farmers and people and miners and that, they can ask for a rebate on the excise tax that they've paid already on the diesel, because they're not going on the roads. Because part of the excise is for maintenance of the road, and all they're getting back is that portion of the excise. Because they don't put it onto their machinery doesn't go on the roads.
Yeah, and by the converse to that is that, as you say, roads are paid for out of the fuel levy. Well, there's no fuel levy on electricity, so the people that are driving those electric vehicles around the place, they are bludgers. They are bludging on the rest of us decent people who pay our fuel levy. They're not, they're not paying for those roads, and because we know an electric car is considerably heavier than a petrol one, so it's going to make more impact.
Well, actually, New Zealand's got ahead of them, actually, because New Zealand, even before the talk about electric cars, they changed their road tax or registration tax and things like that to a miles thing. So every 3 months, you're supposed to get stamps and put in your book which is equivalent to how many kilometres you've done in a 4-cylinder car, 6-cylinder car, or whatever. So they've already got ahead of the game. So it's simply on mileage. And I presume that's the state. Well, that's one of the few things the states have got as a revenue base anyway. So
yeah,
I don't know how long they could last if there was a big uptake on electric vehicles, and to do without that revenue. I think they'd be quickly coming out with a miles kilometres annual usage rate.
Well, I don't think there's going to be a big uptake. I don't see how there can be, because just the amount of minerals required to produce a battery, particularly lithium and other minerals that are in limited supply, there just isn't enough in the world. Even if they used every drop in every available mine, you still wouldn't be able to electrify the world's motor fleet. So, and because what happens is the price goes up. They've been telling us for years, the price is going to come down. Well, I tell you what, it's not. If anything, the gap between a battery car and a petrol one or diesel one is growing, because the price of lithium is going through the roof. So the whole thing is just built on a fantasy. It's just a wish list. It's just a kind of...
Well, it's interesting, actually. I think it was only last year that I think it was a Finnish report, and it went into if we have all electric society and that, wind farms, electric vehicles and that, and it looked at the minerals needed, and as everything took up, and the thing is, if we electrify, I think we generate about 37 terawatt hours all the time. If we have an fully electric society, like get rid of gas stoves, get rid of internal combustion use, we've got to get up to 57 terawatt hours of production all the time. Now, to do that, the minerals that you use, it basically worked out we haven't got enough to even do the first generation of renewable power, the first 20 years to get up to that power. And the thing is, then we've got to do it all over again every 20 years. We've got to throw those wind turbines away, we've got to throw those batteries away, those solar panels, and put new ones in. Well, there's no minerals left even after the first 20 years. So it's quite interesting, and it's quite bizarre that the governments are still pushing this, but they're not taking any notice of these surveys and this sort of information. And I think academia has been very lazy in regards to the pushing or pointing this out as well.
Yeah, I think it comes back to even before we kind of hit on this renewable energy craze, it's just increasingly short-term thinking, isn't it? At every level, people just think in the short term. The governments, the stock markets, companies, and that's where we've got to. And it goes back to what we started on about those great pioneers in Australia. They weren't short-term thinkers; they were very long-term thinkers, and we need to get that mindset back. So we're not thinking, we can put a wind farm up here and we'll be able to make enough cash out of it in the next 15 years. We don't have to worry about what happens afterwards. We don't have to worry about, what happens to that land we've just, pulled apart, and those trees we've just felled, and those, bird habitats we've just destroyed, because we'll make our money and then we'll move on. It just beats me why the Greens can't see through the hollowness of their own argument, and
because that's not their real agenda.
No, No, well, that's
their
right.
agenda is not environment. Their agenda is the redistribution of wealth.
Yeah.
Anyway, just before we get on to the Menzies Research Centre, can I just touch on your book?
The lucky culture. Yeah.
That's it.
uh,
That's
yeah,
the
there it is. Yeah.
that's your book. What inspired you to do this? I mean, we've always been called the lucky country, and I think sometimes that's fairly unfortunate for us. I think we would have been better off having a bit less luck and a lot more effort. I mean, the lucky country was basically built on the sheep's back story. We did magnificently from the Industrial Revolution, supplying wool to England and that to make things, and then after that there was a big demand for our wheat as well. So our agriculture industry were top notch and raking in lots and lots of money that gave us a standard of living well beyond other countries than that.
You very quickly, within 100 years of the first fleet, we were up there in the league, of richest countries in the world. Well, the idea that so I've always been like you. I've always been in trouble with the idea this is a lucky country. That somehow we're wealthy and successful because we're just lucky. Well, you make your own luck, don't you? It was Gary Player who said the more I practice, the luckier I get. Luck is something you make. It just doesn't come out of the ground. And by the lucky culture, I meant that Australia has this culture of hard work and let's get on with it and let's all just pick up the shovel and get on with it kind of thing. If the fence is broke, we fix it. And we've got ingenuity and we're just driven to make something out of this country, which doesn't look very promising on the surface, but when you start working, then you can unleash its riches. So that's what I meant. There was a culture which drove Australia to the idea of prosperity. We had this idea of
I think that culture's changing. I think that culture's changing as from the 50s, moving forward, mechanisation, the reduction of the workforce in regional areas, movement to the cities and that. And now you've got this situation. Well, we in the regions understand what you're talking about, effort and sweat and toil and that being in the farm. But the people in the cities, and they've grown so much. I mean, it's getting to a situation that they outnumber, the people in the city outnumber the rest of the people in the regions almost 4-1 now. And the thing is, they're so disconnected. Like food production, go down to Woolworths. That's where food comes from. They don't understand.
Yeah.
And don't understand the rest of it, and the same people say, "Well, stop killing animals and things like that." Well, where are you going to get the meat? Stop farming because you're ruining things. The disconnect is so, and that's what I'm talking about in this episode. Really, is the regions are not just the state's backyard to be plundered for the benefit of the cities, and we in Central and North Queensland in particular, I mean, we're getting to the situation where we're looking now that the state government's whacked up royalties on because of the better prices and that. They're also, the federal government's whacked on price capping and that. But we're looking at in our coal industry, we're looking to send $12 billion in royalties down to Brisbane this financial year. Now, it's always varied before, up and down sort of thing. As we went into COVID, it dropped from about 4.5 million down to 2. Then it came back to about 5. But this financial year, they'll get $12 billion in their coffers. And unless something drastic happens with the price of coal dropping and that, which is not likely in the near future, there's still a big demand for it. And the thing is, that 12, we can basically count on for the next 10 years, those sort of royalties that are going down to Brisbane are going to pay for the Cross River Rail. They're going to pay for the Olympic Games. They're going to pay for all the glitz and glamour that they need. They need the light rail down to the Gold Coast. And meanwhile, they won't build it. They won't even add 14 metres to the Burdekin Falls Dam, which was something that was in the original plan, because they don't seem to want us to have water security. They won't let us build a Coranda Range to give Cairns an economic pathway to the Gulf. It's sort of frustrating in that. And that's what I'm saying in regards to, I think the culture's changed from that wider base of Australia where there was an even spread of the population and the wealth creation, to now where the situation is our revenue and our currency strength and that lies in the export of iron ore and coal. Take those things away, our dollar will probably be about 30 cents. But it's the cities who are basically having a say in regards to what the rest of the state has to do.
Yeah, I think you're right. And well, of course, as you say, the population ratio about 4 to 1 now, city versus country. It's probably slightly different in Queensland as a state, but still an overwhelmingly number are that way. And that, of course, what that means is your political power goes down. Your representation in Parliament proportionally is less, and your voices are not heard as loudly as they once were. So yeah, I do think this is a real issue, but we definitely do ignore the regions at our peril. I mean, it's kind of odd, isn't it, that the Queensland government has got, very happy to take the royalties from coal and spend them, and spend more, actually, go more money, but they're not. They don't like it somehow. They want to shut it down somehow. They think it's the wrong. It's hypocritical, isn't it? If they think coal is so bad, they shouldn't be taking the royalties from it.
Well, my suggestion is, if they don't like taking, they don't like seeing coal and that, just cut off the North Queensland and Central Queensland somewhere around about Bundaberg, and say, you evil people, we don't want any part of your coal and all that sort of thing, and let us run ourselves, and they can live on whatever they want to live on, but they won't have the royalties from the coal, and see how they like that.
Well, I think it's an excellent idea, except the people of Gympie get a bit ratty. They want to be north of the line, but
well, it's a pretty hard place. You have to draw a line somewhere. So actually, it's quite interesting. When Tony Abbott was in, I think he brought out the white paper on the development of Northern Australia. And one of the things that happened there was the North Australia Infrastructure Fund. And what it did was quite interesting. It actually provided a dividing line between Northern Australia and the rest, and which basically took in the Gladstone Shire, around the Banana, and then across to the South Australian border and just dropped below. So we do have a defined area that is Northern Queensland, which I'm quite happy to support. If Queensland want to tear itself out, I'm quite happy with that line. But the thing is, the Northern Australia Infrastructure Fund provided $15 billion, I think it was, for loans to develop industries and entrepreneurship in Northern Australia, right across the Pilbara. But it seemed to me a very poor product in regards to, here in a time of historically low interest rates, you're having this funding thing where people can just borrow a bit of money supposedly cheap. And it's basically never delivered anything. And I remember when probably after a year or so after it started, maybe 2 years, there was a bit of jumping up and down because all the bureaucrats are actually in Melbourne running it. and they actually dragged them out of Melbourne and actually brought them up to Cairns, the office there. But I don't think a lot of those people came. I think they transferred somewhere else in Melbourne. But they're not the things. They're not the things we want. We want proper infrastructure. We want proper roads, proper dams, and that. And that's not really forthcoming.
No, I think that's right. No, definitely. I think, you know, I think Queensland's particularly bad at that, at roads in particular. You know, I was up in last August, I think it was. We were up in Mackay. We drove Mackay to Bowen. I could not believe the condition of that highway.
That's a major highway. That's their #1 highway.
They told me that these roadworks have been going on for 18 months and the company that was doing them had gone broke. I said, when was that? I said 6 months ago. And the Queensland government just left it. It was an absolute disgrace, I thought. But
well,
it just seemed
we have
just got no care for people up there.
We have situations here where we had what they call the Peninsula Development Road up to Weipa, and the first contract was let to a South Australian company that started the program in the wet season. So, how do you think that went? You know, all the machinery was just bogged there for 6 months. You know, and it's still a disgrace. I mean, it's still going on year after year. And the thing is, there's no long-term plan in it. So we'll give you a bit more money and a bit more money, and that's the same for the Bruce Highway. There's no strategic planning in and say, well, the whole thing has got to be built and that's it, and the funds are going to be guaranteed. So start from that end and work to the middle or whatever, but just get it done. It is fairly shameful that here it is 2023 and we have a major connecting highway up the East Coast that looks like a goat track at times, and it's not even it's not even an all-year road, because you can guarantee for 6 weeks of the year some sections are going to be unpassable because of flooding, and that's pathetic.
Yeah. So originally, no, I think that's right. Why does it cost us so much to build this stuff here? You know, it costs 50% more to build a road here than it would in the UK. One main reason is the unions. You know, all these projects get unionized, and then there's a CFMEU cost on top. You know, it's about 30 or sometimes 40% more because of all the deals they've got to do for tea breaks and, you know, rostered days off and the rest. So that means we're paying for 10 kilometers of road and we're getting 6 or 7 at the best, because the rest of it is what the unions cream off. We have to go smarter about this and realize that, you know, when these unions get too powerful and are able to make these big claims, it's us who pay. You know, either it's customers or taxpayers or whatever. So, you know, we just got to be able to build roads quicker and cheaper.
That goes for all infrastructure, you know, even schools and things like that. You know, we've got to get into the situation where local companies can get the job, the work. I mean, I don't know if you remember the GFC and the rebuilding schools program. And we had situations where the ones who did best of it were actually the independent schools. They set themselves up to get the funds and manage them themselves. Whereas with the state government schools, we had situations where the Labor governments allowed the collection of the work in an area. Say there was 4 or 5 schools. They counted that as one lot of money, so it was over $2 million. So that means they have to have this bigger contract, and people from Sydney were going out, you know, out to Dubbo to do this work, and no locals will get in because they managed to put those works into one envelope, and because it was over that 2 million cap, they could easily get the unions to go and do the job. So,
Well, I've just got to plug my computer in before it runs out of battery. Hang on one second.
Okay, then. We'll try not to hold you up too much longer.
I've got about 10 more minutes anyway. So
if we could move on to the Menzies Research Centre and can give us an overview of its job and its inputs and outputs.
Yeah, so we're a think tank. We are actually affiliated to the Liberal Party, but we don't receive any funds from them. We raise all our money ourselves, and we do public policy research. So we look at things like, well, a lot of what we've been talking about: energy policy, union influence, whatever, housing policy, and we do some work on it. But we also hold conversations. I mean, what we're doing now is fantastic. This is just the kind of conversation we like to have, just so that we can get people interested and focused on smarter and cleverer ways of doing things, because we there's so much we're doing at the moment that we just seem to be doing very badly. And trouble when the government starts doing something badly, it never corrects.
We'll never admit it for the first place.
No, I mean, it doesn't innovate, right? Government, it won't admit it. That's right. But if if you're running a clever business, you improve your products as you go along, and if something's not working, then you drop it and move on to something else. Not governments. If something goes wrong, the answer always seems to be it's not working because there's not enough money, and we've got to throw more money at it.
Their solution is simple: more money, more taxpayers' money. That's the solution to everything. It wasn't my mistake. These other problems that weren't foreseen or whatever, and yet Mickey Mouse could have seen the problems that they were going to cause. But in regards to Bob Menzies, and I suppose that's what it's based on, and his philosophy and principles. Do you try to sort of put those principles out into the field and sort of try to foster those principles? Because I don't see the Liberal Party today as anything what it was under Menzies. I don't see anything even under John Howard. I think it had a little bit of catch back with Abbott, but then after that it's just gone, well, really, there's so many disaffected Liberal people out there who won't give you your primary vote, I tell you that, and that's a person like me. I won't give give the Liberals my primary vote. I'll give it to someone where I know it will eventually flow down them. As long as it flows to them before the Labor and the Greens, I don't really care. But I'm not going to endorse the Liberal Party that basically backstabbed Abbott, who had basically, in actually one term, almost got rid of Rudd and Gillard and almost won the election, except for Oakeshott and Windsor. Now, the people who voted in those electorates did not vote. I bet you they did not vote for Labor in their thinking. And I suppose there's an interesting thing. Would the Menzies Institute have a look at things like recall? Because I think that's one of the things that are lacking in our system, is where someone changes from what they're elected as under a banner of a political party, goes independent or does something completely different from what they said in the electioneering.
Yeah, no, that's right. But anyway, on your first question, yes, we do very much focus on Robert Menzies and his principles. We're very lucky, I think, in that we've got the founder of the party, or the main founder of the party, who had such a great way of expressing and what those values and principles were, in his radio talks, in his speeches. So we've got all that. We know where he came from, and we keep going back to that, because I think if you don't start with your own values and principles before you even start about what your policies are, then you're going to go astray. And I think it's clear in the Liberal Party or in the National Party that when you don't stick to those principles, you lose people, because that's what you represent to them. And the ideas Robert Menzies about families, about enterprise, about keeping government small, about governments remembering that they don't actually have any money. The only money a government's got is what it takes from us or borrows on our behalf, and the importance of private industry and driving the country. those sort of things we come back to time and time again and keep hammering them home, because when the Liberal Party walks away from those, they do very badly. And I think the last election, it's been building for some time, but the last election was really when we saw it in large numbers, that, you know, people on the centre right are
jump onto
finding
the
other
same
places to vote.
policies as the Labor,
Yeah.
well, how's that going to help? I mean, that it's like you need to get all the candidates and the people who are in Parliament and put them in, do courses with them, and these are the principles of the Liberal Party. This is our foundation principles and guidelines. This is what we adhere to, and might have a chance.
Yeah, that's right. Because, you know, we everybody was very fascinated with the teal candidates last time, but I tell you, we lost many more votes to other conservative parties, you know, like Pauline Hanson's One Nation and you know, Clive Palmer's United Australia Party. We lost far more votes to them across the country than we did to the Teals. It's just that with the Teals, they were concentrated in a handful of inner city seats, and so they were actually able to get candidates up. But when you look at the Liberals' primary vote, you know, why did it fall down to the low 30s? That's why. Where did it go? A little bit went to the Teals, but much more of it went to these parties. So we've got to remember, you know, our base, and remember that you know, people are basically conservative and like those principles of freedom and family. And if we wander from those, then, well, we don't have much point as a party anymore, and people are going to recognise that.
I think the other thing with the Teals, a lot of people didn't realise they were voting for communists and socialists because when they got into Parliament, now they're voting for things and backing the superannuation changes and all those sort of things, and big business and big government. So anyway, I think it'll take a little while for people to wake up to that. But where does the Constitution sit with the Menzies Research Centre? Is that also one of the documents you sort of hold dear or something? Or
you do. I mean, they've deliberately made the Constitution to make it hard to change, and rightly so, because you can't just be adding bits to the drop of a hat. You know, it's far from perfect, our Constitution, but it does kind of work, doesn't it? By and large, you know, it sort of worked. It's done us quite well for 120 years, and I'm always very nervous about tinkering with it, as they're talking about doing with the voice. I think it will throw up all sorts of consequences. Anthony Albanese calls it the nation's birth certificate. I mean, I think somebody should teach him it's not. It's our supreme legal document, and if you change it, then it has serious legal consequences. It becomes an instrument that can be used in the High Court to set law. So it is a dangerous thing. You know, of course, you go back and you change it if you could start again, particularly, I think, around the relationships between the states and the federal government. You'd make that clearer, take away some of the overlap and all that kind of stuff. But
well, I think it's also the High Court's got in there as a bit of a problem too, because the states originally had income tax that was granted, that they passed that over during World War II as an interim, supposedly. But when they went to get it back, and because rationing didn't finish in Australia until 1950, in some parts, in some items, the states didn't hurry and get it back. But by the time New South Wales mounted a case to get income tax back, the High Court basically says, "No, you've been without it so long, it's staying with the federal." So they're the sort of things we're up against with the High Court at times. But the other thing is, there's things in our Constitution that we don't use, and which is somewhat unfortunate. We originally had a section in Chapter 7 where Queensland was allowed as a concession to divide itself up north and south and have 6 senators north, 6 senators south. Now, they never that was one of the bargaining points for federation, but they never went on to use that section. And what happened is, I think in about 83, Hawke wiped it, because it said basically until the Parliament otherwise determines. And there's actually a lot of sections in the Constitution which can be changed by Parliament, not necessarily by the Constitution. But there's one part of the Constitution that hasn't been used that should be used, and that's chapter 6, the creation of new states. And I'd like to see the Menzies Research Centre look at chapter 6 for us and see if you can support an option where we can make new states, regional states, and end this where we're just the backyard of the states. If we're given the reins of statehood, we would be powerhouses and add value to the Commonwealth, I think. So I think that's an area that should be discussed.
I think I agree, and it would you're of a size where you'd have a population probably, you're getting on for the size of, certainly twice the size of Tasmania, and probably getting on for the size of South Australia. So it's not an inconsiderable size. And in terms of wealth that you produce, well, yeah, I mean, you're very important. You'd be like Western Australia. You're one of the great, prosperity drivers of the nation. I'd certainly be for it. And I was up there in Townsville a couple of years back now, but having a look around the port. I was being shown around the port and all the work they're doing there. Perfect place to build a new, as they are actually, container hub and bring in stuff, export from there and bring stuff in from there, so it doesn't have to go all the way down to Brisbane and back up by truck. It really is developed into a part of Australia which is unique and quite different from southeast Queensland, and I think you've got every claim to be a state if we wanted to go that way.
Well, central North Queensland is about 1 million people now, so
yeah. So not the size of South Australia, but
no, but financially, our actual GDP and especially now our merchandising exports. I think sea merchandising exports for Tasmania is only about $4 billion. I think it's about $12 billion in South Australia, and ours is $74 billion. So we outclub them, immensely, sort of thing.
You've got to say their wine is better, though, haven't you? They do a nice drop of wine.
Yeah, but come up here and taste our gin and whiskey up on the tablelands. That will do you a treat. But no, look, it would be good to see some interest and support from organisations like yourself and the Menzies Research Centre in regards to at least looking at the states. I mean, unfortunately, our forefathers who wrote the Constitution, they mucked it up. I mean, when we wanted to become new colonies and break away from Sydney and New South Wales, we just sent a petition over to England, bypassed the Sydney Parliament. The Colonial Parliament had a Colonial Department of England had a look at it, decided on it, and then sent it up to Queen Victoria for signature and that. But now, when they wrote the Constitution, it all basically has to be instigated by the state parliament. And there's one thing that Brisbane doesn't want to do is lose its golden goose. So it's more of a struggle now to implement that, whereas before you just could bypass that parliament.
Yeah. Well, anyway, Bill, I've got to make a move. So it's been fantastic to talk to you, and thanks for the opportunity to share some of the work we've been doing and some of our thoughts at Menzies. I'd love to get up there and catch up with you and see more of that beautiful part of the world.
That's okay. If you just hold on a tenth of a second, I'll just introduce next week and then sign off.
Great.
If you enjoyed today's show, please like, share, and subscribe to our Facebook page. Also, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. Now, on Wednesday this week, we'll have episode 80, and we'll have Professor Sean Ong, and he'll be talking about our rivers under the sea. So in the last glacial period, rivers like the Fitzroy River in North Queensland flowed all the way out to the continental shelf, and he'll be showing us the technology that shows us that, and also shows inhabitation out on the continental shelf during the last glacial period. So join us again.